Hello, and welcome to the video on Access for All in DYS for the new Teacher Induction program. I'm Luke Bolton. I'm an instructional coach, and I'll be working with you today. So what to expect? We're going to start by talking a little bit about student characteristics in our program, and then we'll go through universal design for learning in DYS, differentiation, and personal reflection before we get to our final reflection. So the content objective for today is exploring how the principles of universal design for learning, differentiation, and personalization can be applied in our context. And in terms of the content objective, I'm going to be writing written reflections about the content in the presentation, especially at the end. Why does this matter? Why talk about this topic at all? Well, our students come with a lot of academic needs, and the more that we can make content engaging and accessible for them, the more they'll succeed. So, some of our student characteristics. Now, our students, generally we have a challenging student population. This shouldn't be a surprise. They're challenging in different ways. They're not with us for very long. They're inconsistent when attending school in the community, so they often come with a lot of gaps. They've often not had positive school experiences, so they come kind of with a mindset of not being, maybe being resistant to what school might be and engaging in it. And they've often experienced some type of trauma even before coming to our programs, which in itself is a trauma. It is also the case that they have their own talents and knowledge. They're brilliant, they can be funny and joyful. They all want to succeed, learn, grow, and do well. Deep inside, that is a desire that they all have. And with your support, they can and they have. We have students that feel that they have been more successful in our programs than they have been in schools in the community. That's something that teachers are able to do here. So, how does universal design for learning fit into this process? Well, universal design has three big points: engagement, representation, and action and expression. We're going to go through each of those today, and it should allow you to think about how to incorporate them into your program. So start with engagement. That's where they begin, and if we engage students, then we can do all of the other things with them. So thinking about engagement, what are two things that you want our students to be able to have in our learning? Well, the first is that we often want effort and we want persistence. But if you're a student, what are the two things that students want out of their learning? It tends to be they want fun, some type of thing that makes them excited about it, and real life application. So how do we marry those two together? Well, engagement is a key element of this, and there's different aspects of it. The first one is welcoming interests and identities. So thinking about giving them choice and autonomy within the lesson, planning in things that are of relevance, value, and authentic, nurturing joy and play. So our classes can be fun. We can have games, we can have conversations and activities that are joyful. And of course, addressing biases and threats. So when we're removing those, then it's allowing room for engagement and joy. Sustaining effort and persistence, something that teachers often want. Having clear purpose, goals, and the meaning of what they're doing so students know why they're doing something. Then optimizing the challenge and the support so it's not too difficult or too easy and the support is just right. And then fostering collaboration and community. That's something that can happen within our classrooms. The third category is on self-regulation. And that's something where we want students who are thinking about kind of their beliefs, what does that look like, their connections with themselves and others, and being able to empathize and have compassion as well. That when we have that, when we help develop that, it helps everyone to engage in the classroom. Now, an element of engagement to keep in mind is how long do you think a person's attention span is? Well, turns out it's roughly their age plus or minus 2. So when we're thinking about activities and how long we do them before we switch up what it looks like, the content that it is, we can keep this in mind. And then you think about, the average child for one activity, how long they can sustain it. And then think about someone with an attention issue who might have challenges with that. So this is something to keep in mind, that we won't have a class where we say, like, all right, everybody, we're going to read silently for 40 minutes. That's probably not going to fly in our settings. But remember, with engagement, one of the key elements is that nothing can take the place of an enthusiastic teacher who shows their students that they're interested in being there to teach them. And building rapport and relationships with students is huge. Students will do things for you if you have a good relationship they don't want to do or wouldn't do for someone else. So those relationships are essential to engagement. What about representation? Well, there's a couple of different elements in representation. One is perception. And that's thinking about how students interact or perceive content, so that it's not using just a single sense of sight, hearing, movement. And so you can then offer ways and kind of customize information, give alternatives to auditory information. So it's not just, they're not just looking at it, they're listening, or they're not just listening, they're also seeing. And these kind of providing these options can make something go from, say, you have a slide that looks like this, not terribly accessible for someone. You'd look at it and you kind of feel a little bit anxious just seeing it. But, if we're presenting information that's broken up, you've got bullet points, the size of the text can change, you can do different background colors for text to pop, you can add images, video, animation. Already, this slide and the previous one have a totally different feel to them. Of course, language and symbols are things that come up in our programs, in math, but in other areas too. So being conscious of multiple means to create that shared understanding. So I'm sure you remember that when you in math class learned first the greater than or less than sign, there was probably something involved with an alligator, a Pac-Man, so that you had a way to remember what this meant. And you can do that with vocabulary, syntax, and structure, helping clarify that, especially for our English language learners. The mathematical notation I gave an example of. And of course, multiple media. You can have a video of something and then read about it as well. So students are getting it from multiple sources, especially around that shared understanding. Then, of course, around comprehension, that's helping construct new meaning and generate new understanding. And it's often the case that things will stick more when it's connected to background information that we already know. So we can then help highlight patterns, critical features, key ideas, relationships between ideas. And you can guide that processing and visualization with things like mind maps, charts, things where they can see the connection between the different ideas and help them learn how to use that as a tool themselves. Now, let's think about, do a little activity. What would be a connection? Choose one of these 3 topics. What's a connection that you could make to help students understand this? So a concept like natural selection, I'll give an example. Maybe you would look at the average height of a basketball player over time. How has that changed? How does that relate to the idea of natural selection? And of course, you have songs, guest speakers, word webs, pictures association, all of these things that can connect with students' lives and communities. All right, last one, action. This is about giving multiple ways to show learning and giving student choice, building from formative to ultimately summative. But think about all the different options, and especially non-traditional means, which will often be more interesting to our students and to you. So we don't want to just give them a traditional test. We've got other ways to do it. And this can be for formative or summative assessments. For example, you might have, the creation of a podcast, putting together a video, narrated in art, visual note-taking. You can have, they can build a game together, create a photo story. There's all sorts of options. And many of the things we can do in our program with a bit of creativity. Of course, there's some materials that aren't available, but many teachers have found ways around that. This brings us to differentiation and personalization. So we'll start with differentiation, but also we can kind of think of all of them together. So if we think about universal design for learning, this is kind of the widest area. This is something that relates to all students. And it connects all of them. It's a support that works for everybody. It's universal. Now, when we get to differentiation, we're going to start talking about modifying it for specific groups of students. And ultimately to personalization, where individual students are given kind of greater autonomy, and you're designing things specifically for a few people. Now, what about differentiation? That's when a teacher tailors instruction to meet the learning needs, the preferences, the goals of individual, often groups of students. Now, looking at that is going to be based on the students and the contents. It's going to look different. It can be very simple in terms of having a worksheet that has some additional writing prompts or some sentence starters to help them, or it can be differently designed work and problems. But it does take time, and it can feel like a lot. You could feel like, oh my God, I'm doing one thing for one student, one thing for another student. How do I do this together all at once? As opposed to the universal design for learning, where you're doing one thing that works and supports everybody. And it's true, this is a challenge, but the results are that the students will be able to learn better when you've made those changes for them. So what are things differentiation can focus on? Can look at content. So how are you using different materials or modifying materials or trying different teaching methods? You can look at the process of it. So how are you modifying the activities that students do so they can better understand and access it? Or product, the things they're creating. How are you designing assessments so students can demonstrate their understanding of content in different ways, which relates to some of the elements of UDL we just spoke about? And for culture, how are you adjusting kind of your language, your expectations, taking into account elements of student culture that are different? So there are a number of tools to help us with this. Just on text differentiation, for example, Newsella allows you to change the reading level of text, provides questions and other activities. Magic School AI allows you to change the level of a text you input, create assignments or problems that are at different levels, or even create problems around themes, things that students are interested in. So you can create word problems that are based on basketball, hip hop artists, and find the thing that suits student interests and kind of be modified for different students at their levels as well. So what about personalization? Now, there's a difference between personalized learning and differentiation that we spoke about. In personalized learning, it tends to be that the learner is the one that is driving the process, connects with their interests, talents, and passions. They're the active participant, and it's more about self-direction. As opposed to with differentiated instruction, it tends to be that the teacher drives the learning, is making those adjustments, is doing the design themselves. And that, while they both will kind of cater to the needs of people, the focus is a little bit different. But in terms of personalization, what does that actually look like? Well, it's kind of teaching like a London taxi driver. This is a picture of the streets of London. And as you can imagine, it's quite complicated. There's this incredible test that you have to basically have memorized all of the streets so that if somebody gets in your taxi and they tell you, take me to this place, you can know what is the exact route that you need to get there. No GPS involved. And that's kind of what we're doing as teachers. When a student comes into our class and they're telling us what they want to do, what they want to work towards, we're thinking, what is their individual route to get there? And so one way to do that can be providing stations where you have differentiated learning opportunities. Students can select where they want to go. This is allowing that autonomy. So you're kind of setting up the environment for them to then make choices. Maybe you have different, similar kind of topic of math. One is a data station. One is a station where they're working collaboratively. Another is a station where they have objects. Students are then choosing the learning path that best suits them. Or maybe you're giving them a menu and you're saying, okay, you have to pick a beverage, appetizer, 2 appetizers, an entree, and maybe the teacher will do a side and your dessert is an extension. And you have different things for them to choose on based on the topic that they're studying. Maybe a tic-tac-toe choice board where there's certain selections that are required. They start with the one in the middle, and then they can do, any of 1, 2, 3 to 4, and then or 1 from 6, 7, 8. So again, they have choice on the type of learning that they want to make. It's largely can be self-directed. This is an example of what that might look like with kind of links to all the pieces for students that are working on computers. But for a class period, then, what does that look like if students are doing their individual work together? Well, the workshop model is a way to approach this, where you will start with a do now, a kind of starter activity that sets the tone for the class, gets students excited about learning, brings people together, class has started. Then move into a mini lesson where you kind of have a common theme that all the students are working on. It might be a transfer skill, future ready skill, something that will relate to the work that everybody is doing, kind of bringing people together before then releasing them into student-driven work or independent work time. This is where it's personalized for them. They're working on the specific thing that they need to advance and grow. And then in between, you're checking in, kind of seeing how people are doing. You might call the whole class back together or just do individual check-ins so that you're not disturbing everyone. Might highlight some commonalities between students. Before getting it to the very end, the share session, you might be asking students to share out what did they learn about, maybe a more specific reflection on the skill that you started the day with. That can kind of follow a full structure, and you see the kind of timing is broken out there. Whew. All right, we've made it through UDL, differentiation, and personalization. So now you've got two options for our final reflection. The first one, why do teachers in DYS need to be thoughtful about their use of UDL, differentiation, and personalization in their class? Or what is a tool or approach you learned about that you would try in class? Why?